Good evening. It's 5 o'clock. May we start? So good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Friday Fundamentals webinar of Bombay Management Association. We had announced today the webinar on prevention of disease with sensible diet by Shri Harish Shetty of Ayurveda, but due to some exigencies, he is unable to take the session, but he has promised that as he gets recovered, he will be taking this session sometime. So look forward to the session by Harish Shetty on prevention of disease with sensible diet. Today, we will have our EC member, Executive Council member, committee member, Shri Shripad Ranade, to talk on a very interesting topic of leading yourself, going beyond managing yourself. We all know that last few sessions that we were listening, it was all about how do you just not manage yourself, but lead yourself. And it came in the masterclass of Dr. Pramath-Raj Sinha, who gave us 5 principles. And these 5 principles, one of them was definitely how do you lead yourself? How do you lead your life? And this is what is today Shripad is going to talk about. Shripad is a life member of Bombay Management Association, and he is a founder of Ikigai Discoveries, a leadership coach, a management consultant, who is very active in our Leader Next and Leader 2020 learning and development program that Jamnalal Bajaj and Bombay Management Association had started since 2018-19. Shripad is a speaker at has been a speaker at major industry events, and he has authored more than 20 published articles on manufacturing. He has delivered talks on strategy, people management, personal vision, and for corporates and the bodies such as FICCI. He was practice head at Tata Strategic Management Group, a Tata Group strategy formulation, working with the company as CEO to reorient business and teams, strategy and operations consulting inside and outside Tata. He has previously worked for leading multinational and Indian corporates, and he has a total professional experience of almost 23 years. A BE and MBA from Jamnalal Bajaj Institute of Management Studies. Shripad is a member of Executive Committee since 2019 of Bombay Management Association, and has been very active in all the activities which we are doing at BMA. He has been a corporate director corporate partnerships and trustee managing committee of Mumbai chapter of International Coaching Federation, where he is very, very active, and his coaching initiatives and coaching experiences he always shares with us. And today also we are looking forward to similar kind of experience today also. A person who has lot of dimensions and has been very, very active in the field. So I'll request Shripad to start his session. And I'm very happy that in spite of very short notice, Shripad has accepted the invitation to do this session. We came to know very late from the office of Shri Harish Shetty, but then we don't wanted to miss any Friday, and Shripad is here. So first of all, Shripad, thank you so much for making it, and request you to take the session ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Laghate. as they say, blessing in disguise. While wishing Mr. Shetty all the best, I am very happy to be here, and I thank everyone for the opportunity. I see you are here, past presidents are here, and most importantly, we have an audience here who's here to hopefully take away something about leading themselves. So I am very happy, therefore, to be here and to be of service. And I put a tagline here saying, "Leading yourself, going beyond managing yourself." And I'll start from there itself, and I hope my slide is visible, and I will just continue, right? Um, so why I've spoken about managing yourself is that, as people get into the workforce, they are told that you have to manage yourself, you have to develop some basic hard and soft skills, whether it is etiquette or whether it is prioritization and time management and so on. And once you learn how to manage yourself, you'll be allowed to manage others. Slowly, you will start getting some reportees and you'll be allowed to manage other people. So most of us are aware of this concept of managing yourself and then being allowed to manage others. But very few of us think of it in terms of leading yourself. Most of us follow. That is a reality. By definition, leadership and followership is a pyramidal concept. So most of us follow. But there is a nuance to following, that you can follow the leader of the organization, but you need not follow someone else for your own life. And therefore, our topic today is all about leading yourself overall for your life. And as I say that, I always start from here. Most of us have read this book, Alice in Wonderland, and its companion book, Looking through the Looking Glass. And if we remember this situation, the picture that you see on the left, this is the little girl Alice, who is at a crossroads in the forest. She's a bit scared, and she's wondering whether she should go straight or left or right. And even as she's wondering, she just looks up and she says, "There's a cat sitting there." And surprisingly, because it's a children's story, the cat can speak. So this is the Cheshire cat, and Alice asks her which direction she should take. And what the cat says is that depends a good deal on where you want to go, right? And Lewis Carroll, who wrote this book, and then of course the Queen liked the book and asked for his next book to be hand delivered to her. But he was a mathematician, she got a book about calculus for all her efforts. So he was a mathematician, so he was very precise. And in this children's book, what he has done is he has taught not only children, he has taught adults also. And that is why this book is here in front of us today. The cat says, it depends a good deal on where you want to get to. And Alice says, I don't much care where. I'm in a forest, I'm enjoying the walk. I can go in any direction. There are flowers in front of me, there are flowers on the left and the right. So I don't much care where I go. In which case the cat says, then it doesn't much matter which way you go, right? If you don't know where you want to reach, then it doesn't matter which way you take. I can tell you, but you need to first tell me. But Alice says, no, as so long as I can get somewhere. And this is where this becomes about our adult lives, that we all want to be somewhere and reach somewhere in life. If you ask someone, where do you want to be at the end of your life? Oh, I want to reach somewhere, but where, I'm not sure. So then the cat says, oh, you're sure to do that if only if you walk long enough. So if you walk long enough, if you have a long and healthy life, then by the time you're 60, 70, 80 or 90, you will reach somewhere. But you may not agree with where you have reached. So that is where we start from, that we are all Alice and we are all wondering which direction to take. And this is actually not about a particular age, but at any age in life, we start asking the cat, and the cat says, first tell me where you want to reach, right? So therefore, the idea is that you need destination before directions. And Google Maps can give you directions, but even in Google Maps with all that AI, first you have to tell Google Maps what the destination is. Then you can be given the directions. So many people, when I say this, people often say, but why should I care? Let me reach anywhere. So I want to offer two perspectives as to why we should care about the destination. And one is an Eastern perspective, one is a Western perspective. As with most Eastern perspectives, we will see the Eastern perspective also through a bit of a Western lens, because that is how we do to most philosophy nowadays. And the Eastern perspective, therefore, is Ikigai. And in fact, I call my firm Ikigai Discoveries for this very reason. So Ikigai is a Japanese word. Those who know Japanese as a language well, please pardon me for my pronunciations. But Ikigai is it's a compound word. It really is made up of two words, Ikirukai, and it means life to be worthwhile. So what do you have to do, or what should it be that will make life worth living? Why should you get up in the morning and get out of bed? And what they have found is that for life to be worthwhile, you need to have longevity, health, and happiness. A short life is seldom satisfactory, an unhealthy life is seldom satisfactory, an unhappy life is seldom satisfactory. But the interesting thing about this, because this by itself is a platitude, the interesting thing is that they are saying if you can get it right in terms of you don't have to stop working so that you don't have stress. Most of us equate work with stress. They're saying if you can never retire but never stress, then you have your ikigai. And when the Westerners looked at this concept, they realized that if you look at the person who's in Grihastashram, if you look at the person who's the householder, there are essentially two ideas that we are grappling with, which this concept answers to. One is the question we ask. Suppose, for example, I am a painter. I was telling Indrapalji that I love the painting behind him on the wall. So if I'm a painter, I may say I love painting and I'm good at painting. But does the world really need painters? And will they pay for my painting? And at the reverse end, if I'm a carpenter, I know that the world needs carpenters. And they pay me also every time, I get hired as a carpenter, I've paid for it. But how good am I at it? And most importantly, do I love it? So we go from either one end to the other or the other end back to the first. And so someone very cleverly put all of this together into this graphic. And some people in the audience would have seen this graphic in the past. This is essentially what we call a Venn diagram. So there are 4 circles here, yellow, green, dark green, and on the right is pink. And they're all the 4 elements of what most people want from their work and their life. And most people think, oh, this is the Ikigai graphic, but actually not. Somebody made this graphic and then someone else from the West just put the word Ikigai in the middle of it. It was an epiphany. But now that it is there, it's serving a very good purpose, which is that to get your Ikigai, you need to find something which is all 4. And I'll quickly take you through this. The single intersections are quite obvious, right? If you do something that you both love and you're good at, then at the top left, that's your passion. If you're a carpenter, as I said, then that's your vocation. Why do we call it a vocation? Because you got paid for it, which is at the bottom, and the world needs carpenters. So you need not love carpentry. You need not be very good at carpentry. You need to have a basic skill. You will get paid and the world will want you. So there are choices to be made. If, however, you are in one of the more nuanced professions, so as I said earlier, if you're a painter, you may say, I'm great at painting. And of course, people pay me for it. And I love painting. But from time to time, some cynic comes across and says, does the world really need classical art? Does the world really need fine art? Is an artist really useful to the world? So if you see the label for that small petal on the left, the small green petal on the left, the label for that is what the artist feels. He feels satisfaction, but a feeling of uselessness. And so on. If you look at the carpenter may say that the world needs it, and he may say, oh, actually, I love carpentry. He may not be good at it, but he may still get paid for it. And what will he have? He'll have some complacency, excitement, but he'll have a sense of uncertainty. Kaam milega, nahi milega. So depending on where you are, you will always have some feeling. And therefore, life then becomes a unending spectacle of trying to, a bit like a bee on a flower, trying to walk through these petals and reach the center and get the nectar. So if you get the nectar at the right at the center, then what are you doing? You are hopefully doing all 4. So if I take my own example, when I coach, I do many things, but specifically when I do one-to-one coaching, I love coaching. I have a bunch of certificates which tend to suggest that I am reasonably good at it. People pay me for it. And does the world need coaching? Does the world need help to self-reflect and be happier and more effective? Yes. So what will happen, because all 4 are in place, if you read any of the labels at the bottom left, I'm comfortable, but do I have a feeling of emptiness? No, I don't have a feeling of emptiness because I love it as well. So this is a beautiful graphic. It really makes you think about where you are. Most of us are in one of the inner petals and we want to move towards the center. And what do you want to do to move towards the center? That becomes the topic. Now, as we look at it this way, as I said, I will give you 2 perspectives. The other is the Western perspective. Many of you would have read the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. This came out about 26, 27 years back and became a staple of the self-help revolution. And that's by Stephen Covey. And what he says is begin with the end in mind. He speaks about 7 habits of highly effective people, right? So one of the habits he speaks about, he says begin with the end in mind. and you see a ladder there. So he speaks about the ladder. Which ladder are you climbing? Do you want to climb that ladder? Because what will happen is you will spend all your life climbing that ladder. You will reach the end of the ladder, and then you'll say, "Oh, maza nahi aaya." So that is the provoking question that he asks. And therefore, I'm going to also ask you this question: is the ladder resting against the right wall as far as your life is concerned? And are you climbing the ladder that you want to climb? So when I was a few years ago in the job that I was, I decided that I wanted to climb a different ladder, and I moved away and reinvented my career. And what I do today, I call a second career. And if you see these words, there are 15 words here. Um, all the research suggests, I put them together from the research that I have read, that these are the most common ends that people have in mind when they are in towards the fag end of their life. They want some of these things to come true. So some people may say, I need success, wealth, and status, but others may say, I have had that, but I need challenge, I need achievement, I need excitement. And some others may say, that is all fine, but I need to have a sense of duty, I need to have certainty in my life, I need to have comforts, and so on. Nothing is right or wrong about these. But the fact is, each of us has a bunch of 3 or 4, which are more important than the rest. Since none of us are ascetics, all of them are important, but 3 or 4 are more important than the rest. So I've given you 2 perspectives, which really are saying the same thing. They are both saying that we need to have some deliberate thinking about what our destination in life is. What our regrets will be when we are at our deathbed is something that we need to start thinking of. And of course, at this stage, it is possible that some of us in the audience may say, I'm either too young or too old for this, but I will address that in a moment. For the moment, let me connect this back to what I said at the start, which is leading and managing. And I know that there are several management gurus and professionals in the audience, and with their permission, when I was part of right in the thick at Tata Sons, I was seeing that there are really 2 things that are being done: leading and managing. And most of us know the theoretical difference between leading and managing, but just putting it up here, leading is doing the right things, managing is doing things right. I still vividly remember it was Mr. Mistry who was then the chairman at that time of Tata Sons, and we were in a large group meeting with him. And one of the MDs of one of the Tata Group companies had a monologue of about 10 minutes where he described how a particular government contract could be won by Tata's instead of by some other consortium. And after hearing him out, Mr. Mistry asked him, but would that be the right thing to do? And all of us around looked at each other and said, this is a chip of the old block. Some things don't change. This is the question that would have come from Mr. Tata as well. So yeah, maybe this is not the right thing to do, but we can do it right. And that's the critical difference where he said, let someone else do it. Let them get the contract. This is not the first time that our group has lost something because we do the right things. It's okay. So that's the distinction very clear in our minds about what is leading and managing. Now, if you apply this to your own life, and that is the crux of our conversation today, most of us don't apply this to our own life. We do only managing. We do things right for ourselves, but we don't lead ourselves. So what would leading yourself mean? Leading yourself would mean doing what's right for you, not for the authority figures, but for you, rather than just doing things in a way that they work. Not just working well, but working on what you want to work on. And then, therefore, if I draw the parallel and stretch it further, what is called mission and values, which is enduring purpose and reason for existence and so on via corporations, if you bring it down to an individual level and speak about personal mission, what is the mission that you are on? Then it's about what makes you tick. What's the purpose? Why do you do it all? And the second part, again, drawing the parallel, is as a corporate writes a vision, at an individual level, when we say, what's my personal vision for myself? Where do I want to reach? And this could be a small number of years or a large number of years. My father, for example, is 88. And if I ask him, what do you want to do next? He has ideas. He's saying, look, there's longevity in the family. I'm just 88 now. Maybe I'll buy some property and do something with it because I have another 5 years, I think. So he still wants to reach somewhere. He has a personal vision. So this has nothing to do with age. And then, of course, I come across MBA students, Dr. Lagate will agree, that there's a lot of input that we need to give to our current MBA students because many students have not noticed that they need to start planning out where they want to go. So for all of us at all stages of life, this is important. And therefore, I come to the topic of life stage transition. Many of us think that, personal mission or vision may be more important at certain stages in life. What I'm proposing is that look at these people. They are at every stage in life. At each stage in life, they have to make sure that they don't fall off. To not fall off and to go to the next level, to transit to the next stage in life. And we have a rich philosophical background here in India regarding the ashrama, one after the other, right? To do that, we need to know where we are going. And it's important to start with what we have. And sometimes people ask this question saying, how can I decide where I'm going? I am given some things. We sometimes call it the fixed mindset versus the growth mindset. I'm given some things. How can I improve upon that? Of course, you can improve upon that, as many of the other gurus who may have come and spoken at our BMA webinars have also been saying. You can do more than what you are born with. And a great example of that, and that this is an example I particularly like because it connects with me. It also connects with many younger people. Is this man? Now, this man is quite an interesting example of really deciding deliberately where you want to go in life. If you have a trait of aggression along with being good at cricket, what do you do with that? You are known worldwide as somebody who swears on and off the field, gets into fights, and he could have gone the way of another illustrious cricketer, Vinod Kambli. But what's the difference between Vinod Kambli and Virat Kohli? The difference is, it can be argued, of course, that Vinod Kambli had perhaps more skills, talents, strengths, traits as a cricketer. But what was the one trait that differentiated the two? The trait that differentiated the two was that Virat was able to take his aggression and he was able to turn it into the skill of getting under the opponent's skin. He was able to direct it and make it a strength. So therefore, with whatever we are born with, it is possible to reorient that. And that is what coaches do, help you to reorient what resources you have and maximize your personal or professional potential. Now, why am I talking about this? I'm talking about this generally to make the ground that there is a case to be made for spending some time in working out what your personal mission should be, what your personal vision should be. As Dr. Lagate said, during the Leader Next program, we actually run a full module on getting the participants to understand where they should be going in life personally and professionally. But just giving you a sneak peek here is what we are doing today. When we look at mission and values, it's really like getting a compass for ourselves, right? We don't have a compass by itself. We have to create that compass for ourselves. And that is called discovering your mission. Now, what is mission? Because mission sounds like jargon and most of us are not very clear. Though I went on and on for the last 10 or so minutes, not all of us are completely clear what is meant by mission. So let me look at it this way. See, in life, finally, we want results, right? You may want to be successful. You may want to be a CEO. You will take certain actions for it. You will discuss with other people. You may discuss with a coach as to what behaviors you want. Maybe you want to be more risk-taking, something like that. But will you be more risk-taking? There will be a feeling which is under the water. This is the typical iceberg analogy, right? Most of it is under the water. There will be a feeling of anticipation and also a feeling of fear, but that's under the water. Unless you go down below the water and look at what is happening to yourself, you will not be able to achieve the results and the actions. So as you walk the stairs down below the water, you will reach down to your values and needs, which values are what you stand for. If you stand for self-respect, for example, you may say, I stand for self-respect. If I take risks, I will fail. If I fail, I'll get humiliated. So let me not take any risks. And hence you will not have results. So your value of self-respect might either help you to achieve success or might hold you back from success. And there are needs. All of us have a need to be liked, a need to be treated well, and so on and so forth. So mission is about understanding these needs and values. With or without a coach, understand what your primary needs are, what motivates you, what do you really stand for, is what are your values. So let's spend the next about 5-6 minutes on this topic of mission. And then we'll move to the other idea I put up right at the start, which was vision, which was how far you go. But first look at mission. And to start, we have to look at what motivates you. And some of us may be aware of something called a two-factor theory of motivation, which is that there are hygiene factors and there are motivators. So, if I ask someone, why do you like to go to office? Then they're unlikely to say that I love going to office because I have a great washroom. Very unlikely. If you have a dirty washroom, you don't want to go to work. But the cleaner your washroom at work is, the less and less dissatisfied you are. So hygiene factors are the kind of things which can just reduce dissatisfaction. But if you have a good cafeteria at work, you have a good dining room at work, that creates satisfaction because you are able to sit down with your mates, with your colleagues, and you're able to exchange something about life. So that's the difference between the two. And therefore, also, you can tell anyone anywhere in the world that I'm unhappy because we have bad washrooms. And that's reasonable. Everybody finds it reasonable. But you tell someone else, I love going to work because we have a great cafeteria and they allow us to spend a lot of time there. And I enjoy chatting up with my colleagues. And it may not make sense to other people. Somebody may say, I don't want to chat with my colleagues. I just want to do my work and come home. So motivators are different for different people. The washroom, everybody needs. That's the difference. And when you start looking at it like that, what is the washroom really? It's just allowing you to work. So the hygiene factors are really just allowing you to participate in life. And therefore, I'm going to say, what is it that allows you to just work? You need to have your laptop nowadays. You need to have your salary on time. That just allows you to participate in life and work. But if you get recognition, challenging work, and so on, that differentiates your life from the other fellow, from the next fellow. So that is what motivates you. So the reason I'm speaking about this is that once we become clear about what makes us love our work versus what makes us just not hate our work, it becomes easier for us to realize that motivation is not only about what we get. Typically when people start their work life, I've seen this more with people in their 20s and less as people age, of course, is that it is all about how much do you get? Am I getting the right designation, the right promotion? Am I getting the most money out of all the people who passed out of the school the same time as me? And so on and so forth. Can I buy a bigger car? But it's not only about what I get, but also slowly but surely what starts happening, is what you get to give also starts motivating you, which means challenging work, a sense of recognition, being able to help others succeed, mentoring others who may be younger than you. That also starts becoming motivators. And many of us are not sure whether we should build our personal mission around motivators or around hygiene factors. And since we are not sure, we never write down that personal mission, but the default personal mission becomes, I want to be rich, I want to be seen as successful, and I want to have wealth. And at some point, it starts rankling because it doesn't motivate you any longer. So therefore, it's important to start looking at these. And therefore, I'm not suggesting that any of us becomes an ascetic, but I'm suggesting through this, this comparison that I have put down, please examine what is it other than the most obvious hygiene factors without which you'll walk away from work. What is it that makes you go into work? It is more likely to be something that you give rather than what you get. So that's one part. And of course, that's a complete exercise one needs to do. The second part, I'm deliberately throwing at all of us a large number of words. These are all words which are values for somebody or the other. They may not be values for you, but just look at this. Some of them are obvious. All of us have some kernel of a group of values, which is integrity, honesty, ethics. And so that's very obvious for most of us. So if you see, for example, in the second row, about 2/3 down, there is something called ethics and trust. And just on its right, there's something called integrity. If asked, most of us say, yes, that's a value for me. Meaning, I stand up for it. I'll stand up for it. But sometimes some other people have some things that are very important to them, and that really surprises us. So for example, at the bottom right, there's teamwork. And for some people, teamwork is very important. They'll stand up for the value of teamwork. They will not like individual contributors or lone warriors, as it were. So it depends on what is important to you. The most unusual are the values which only some people have and everyone else finds it silly. So for example, in the third column there, not row, the third column there, halfway down, you have humor or fun. There are some people for whom they will stand up for the right to laugh. They'll stand up for the right to make fun of things. They'll stand up for the place of humor in a healthy life. And others will say, how dare you laugh at this? This is not something funny. Right? So the whole point in showing you this bunch of values is to make all of us aware that people are very different in terms of what they stand up for. And therefore, I'm going to invite all of you to spend the next 2 minutes with me quite leaned in, as we call it, to really release the judgment over what values should be. Center yourself and just think for a moment. If you want, take a piece of paper and a pen, and just think, what should your values really be? What is it that you really stand for? What's important to you? As you do that, I say release judgment, release your own judgment as well as others. Because in India, our culture is that I'm given my values by my parents. First, my parents tell me what I should stand for. Then my friends start telling me. Then my girlfriend or boyfriend. Then my boss and my peers start telling me what's important. Then my wife or husband start telling me, or my partner. And lastly, then my children start telling me what should be important for me. So in our culture, because we are not an individualist culture, it is very difficult to stand up for something that those around you do not stand up for. But I'm postulating that it's important. So let's release that judgment and just bear with me and think with me. What values do you notice in each of the following instances? I'm giving you some instances. The first of them is peak experiences. When I say peak experiences, these are the times in your life when you felt really great, when you were thrilled, when you were happy, when you were top of the world. What made you feel top of the world is the question that you have to answer. So, for example, if you found a 500 rupee note lying on the ground, you picked it up, you shouted out, maybe it was a mall, you were able to trace out the person whose 500 rupee note it was. You went and gave it to that person. You felt good about it. You honored some value of your own. Perhaps you honored your own value of honesty, your own value of doing good for others, and so you felt great. Or you made someone who was crying smile. So you had another value of your own which you were honoring. So think of those experiences which are the best times of your life, and you will come up with some words. They will be some of the words from that smattering of words in the previous slide. And the same way, trough. We say peaks and troughs, right? So what are your trough experiences? These were times when you felt like, Dharni Ma, mujhe samale. All of us have had these feelings. We are not perfect. All of us have had really bad moments when we are ashamed of ourselves. And we need not talk to others about it, but privately, when was it that you were ashamed of yourself? Those were experiences where you or someone else did not honor your values. For example, you picked up that 500 rupee note and you walked off with it. Times were tough. Maybe you just lost your job. You justified it to yourself. But the fact is, you felt very bad about it because you yourself did not honor yourself, your own values. So, this is an exercise when you spend about half an hour doing this. The other way to do the same exercise, it will start giving you the subset of values which are really yours, which should guide your life. So the other way of asking the same question of peak experiences is what nourishes you, what makes you flower, versus what withers you, what makes you feel bad, what makes you go down in energy. And once you're done this, last but not the least, of course, as I said, all of us have a kernel of honesty, integrity, ethics, and so on as one of our values. So one last check just before we complete our own personal list of values is your code of conduct. That will give you some ideas such as honesty. You can add those, and you'll end up with some eight or 10 value words out of that smattering that I had shown you. This is all available on the net. Once you do this, notice what you have done so far. You have found out what motivates you, not only reduces dissatisfaction. What is it that you want to go in and work? And then when you do go in and start working, this is a list of words which is going to guide you, saying what will you stand for at work, or what will you stand for in life. So when that happens, you have done the two essential components really of mission and values. When you put all of that together, you are fairly clear as to what is the purpose for which you are living your life. But let's hold it there because we are now going to talk about vision. And when we speak about vision, then the mission and vision will both become more clear to you together. Now, just to speak quickly about vision, see what happens when I say vision. Let's put a stake in the ground, and this lens is being held there, and there's a beautiful graphic. Honestly, ask yourself: do you feel ready to do this? Most of us don't. Okay, most of us are not comfortable writing our own future. It is risky. It is scary. It is dangerous. Most of us don't want to do it. And this is my favorite quote. And my in joke is that I never try to pronounce the great man's name in public because I always get it wrong. but yeah, but the thing is, what this philosopher said is essentially that the individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. It's easy to just do what the tribe is telling you to do, but you will have to try that. If you try, of course, you'll be lonely sometimes, you'll sometimes be frightened, but no price is too high for the privilege of owning yourselves. Or, in other words, to connect it back to what we are saying, is that yes, it is not comfortable to plan your own future, but it is worth it. And so, just to recognize some of the discomfort that we feel when we try to do this, because doing it itself is a more mechanical exercise, but I want to take a few minutes in really recognizing what makes it difficult for us to do this. Otherwise, we would have done it. We're all smart people, but we don't do it. And the reason we don't do it and we just walk along life as if it's a walk in the garden is a variety of reasons, of course. One of them is, like any other muscle, if you don't use it, if you don't visualize your future, the muscle atrophies. And visualization is a muscle. If you don't visualize what you will be at 30 when you're 20, then you can't visualize what you will be at 80 when you're 70. So it's a muscle which atrophies. The second is that we are conditioned since childhood. As I said earlier, we are conditioned that you do not have the right to plan on your own what your values would be and what you will stand for. We are not an individualist culture. So from childhood, we are conditioned to make sure that we work for others. Others always have an agenda and we work for their agenda. The third thing, which is a more practical thing for which people refuse to do a vision writing exercise, is that they want to write a perfect vision. And I always say, don't try to write a perfect vision, you will never write it. Just start writing something. But because of a pursuit of perfection, we never write anything. And then, of course, there's fear of failure. If you're 30-year-old and you say, I want to be CEO at 50, it's 20 years of hard work. And what if you don't reach that? So there's a fear of failure. If I don't write it, I can't fail. There's that big joke which goes around where one person asks another, have you ever failed? And the second person says, no, I never failed. And the first says, why have you never failed? And the second says, well, because I have never tried. So that's one way of not failing. So don't write a vision because then you can't fail against it. That's fairly common. But even more interesting is fear of success. What if I actually become CEO at 50? I'm at 30. Through a 20-year journey, at 50, I will become CEO. My friends will desert me because they will think there is no straight way in which you can become CEO. You must have done something. My wife will not like me. My husband will not like me. I will not have work-life balance. Instead, I'll have blood pressure. So I'm fearful of that success. I actually don't want it. So I don't write it. So fear of failure and fear of success make sure between themselves, they are like two gundas. They make sure that we don't plan anything. Last but not the least, the most practical of them is the issue of conflicting priorities. If I ask you to plan for the future and I say, what do you want to be 10 years from now? And I think many of us are academics here and professionals as well. So we know, in interviews, not now maybe that much, but earlier at least, one of the most common questions in interviews, mostly to young people, was, what do you want to be 10 years from now? And it became a bit of a joke because they say, I don't know what I want to be 10 years from now. But even at various ages, whether you are in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, it's difficult. And it's difficult because we have conflicting priorities. I can't just say, if you ask me today, that I want to be healthy. Or I can't just say that I want to have good relationships all around. I also have to say I need a career. I also have to say I need money. So there are many conflicting priorities in life. Right? So how do I write a single line which is really the stake in the ground? And so what we do, and this is actually a long exercise, but I'm showing you the front page of it. We call it a wheel of life. What we say is that, look at this wheel. For you to really, race towards the future, you need a good wheel. And your wheel should have these spokes. So look at the 8 categories. For most of us, these are the 8 things which are most important in life. And I have made it a little bit general, right? For example, I have written significant other. Significant other could be husband, wife, partner, boyfriend, girlfriend, but it could also be other things. For example, if you are a single parent with a single child, and that child is what your world revolves around, then that is your significant other. So I kept it as significant other. You want personal growth. You're all here to learn. You're attending a webinar. So personal growth is important to most of us, and so on and so forth. We want all of these things in our life. You'll notice that I have put career and money as two separate spokes of the wheel. Having said that, how do we use this? We think briefly about what a satisfying life might look like for us, for each of us in each area. So you may say on money, I am 3 out of 10. You put 0 at the center, 10 at the end, radially. You say on money, I'm at 3 out of 10, but I would like to be 8 out of 10. Or you may say on health, I'm 5 out of 10, but I need to do a little bit more. I need to be 7 out of 10. You may say on friends and family, I'm okay actually. My relationships, my primary relationship as well as with others, it's okay. It is 7 out of 10. I don't want to really move it from 7 to 9. It's okay at 7. So you have to take your own calls. So you will come up with some 2 or 3 areas here, which you will say these really need improvement over the next 5 to 10 years. That's the way to look at your entire life of 8 different facets. Of course, you can chop and change and say 3 or 4 areas. Let me do something specific for the next 5 to 10 years. Now, there's a caveat here. If you say I want to be, like for example, on career, if you say I'm at 3 out of 10 and I want to be 10 out of 10, and what's 10 out of 10? I should be CEO. I'm repeatedly taking the same example so that we connect everything to it. I'm not suggesting all of us should become CEOs. I refuse to be one. So if you want to be that, then you also have to be sure that you have the skills and the strengths to actually reach there, right? So it's no point in just writing a vision for the sake of it. Those of us who are in corporate life will recognize that companies sometimes write corporate visions for which they don't have the inherent capability in terms of people, assets, technology, or processes. So let's not make the same difference with our own lives, and make sure that we also have the strengths and the skills to match what we have written as vision. And what we mean by that is strengths and skills which are confirmed through multiple sources, not just one. So I put down 4 sources through which to check whether you have certain strengths and skills. And this is important. Reading from the bottom upwards, most people are only aware of the first, what they have noticed about yourself. So in my case, for example, I started noticing about myself that when I'm in front of someone, I'm in the room with someone, I usually get business. I'm a great salesman when I meet you, but I'm not a great salesman over the phone. So what do I do with that? I checked with colleagues, I checked with friends, and they said, yes, you seem to have the kind of personality where people want to deal with you once they have met you. They like you. Then I checked whether the formal performance appraisal system in my organization, my boss, HR, were they saying something similar? They said, yes, this is a strength that you have. You are able to get along with people and make them feel happy for dealing with you. And then you can also get yourself a psychometric evaluation of any sort, inventories, which can tell you where you are on the normal distribution of that trait among all humans or among a sample. So someone may tell me that I am 53% extroverted and 47% introverted. I may not be 100%, but at least I know where I am. This is an exercise which is worth doing. Many of us really don't know what our strengths and our skills are. Younger people, for example, I used to take interviews at many B schools, whether it is the various IIMs, whether it is JBIMS, whether it is others. And the most common answer to the question, what are your strengths, is that, oh, I work very hard. Right? And those of us who have been interviewers, we know this, that there are some standard strengths that come out. I have great analytical thinking. But let me again, therefore, share a long list. Look at this long list of strengths and be surprised at how strengths can be very different from what many of us think they can be. Again, as I commented on the long list of values, some of them are obvious. For example, on the top left, right at the start of the list, if somebody has creativity as a skill or a strength, of course, in some professions, that's going to help them, or curiosity or critical thinking. But look at right at the bottom right, spirituality or faith. For some people, their spirituality and their faith is a strength because that allows them to be resilient. So for them, that's a strength. And sometimes we may not understand this unless we go through a long list of strengths. So in summary, if you look at what I have been saying till now, I'm saying that first you need to find out what matters most to you. And I call those motivators. And then I said you need to find out what you stand for. And I call those values. And then I said, you put that together. That's really your mission or your values, what you come to work for, and then what makes you really stand up for something. And then I said, you need to understand where you want to go, which I called vision. And I said, you need to have some ability to get there, which is your strengths. So if you are clear what matters most to you, where you stand for, what you stand for, who you're committed to becoming, then you are in a situation where you can start writing something like a vision statement. And I'm mindful of time, and we want to keep time for Q&A. So I'm going to wrap up in the next few minutes. In drafting your vision statement, if any of you actually wants to do this exercise, and as I said, don't allow yourself to say that I'm too young or too old. My father at 88 is very clear. He thinks about 5 years ahead. So a mental picture of your life 5 to 20 years from now. What matters most to you, what you stand for, who you're committed to becoming. And write it in the present tense. For example, if you want to write it for 10 years, today is 2021 as a year, say it is now the year 2031. I am, and then let loose, write what you want to. You choose the language, you choose the structure. Sleep over it, refine it over the course of a week. It's about a lifetime. Don't do it in an hour. You can do it over a week. But the idea is that you will have some direction, and you'll be able to check back against that direction to understand what you're doing and whether you should be doing it. And as I leave you with this idea of drafting a vision statement, let me also in passing mention a little bit about putting, as I say, your money where your mouth is. Because organizations make this mistake all the time. They write a vision statement, they write a 5-year strategic plan. They say, we will play in these markets, we will prioritize these offerings. We are very clear that this is how we'll treat our people. This is the technology we'll use. That's a beautiful strategy document. And then the money does not fund that tech. The money does not fund those people. The money does not really go into those markets, and it does not go into that product development. So execution, all of us know this, execution is important. And therefore, in personal life as well, to execute your vision, you need to make sure that you're putting your money where your mouth is. Organizations, the currency for an organization is money. The currency for a human is time. The only resource that you really have as a person is your own time. So redeploy your time. If you are saying, for example, I said a few years ago, I want to be a coach, then I should jolly well spend 1.5 years learning coaching, which I did. I spent money, I spent time, I spent effort. I said no to many other things because I wanted to do this. So invest your resources in the service of your agenda. If you don't do it, sometimes people say, oh, I don't want to have a vision and I can just go along. But be careful. You may not be working towards your agenda, but believe me, in that case, you're working to someone else's agenda, because you may not have a vision, but someone else does, and you'll be working for their vision. So you might as well work for your own, right? And that child there is actually there because it represents something called a marshmallow test. For those of us who have a psychology background or read, we may know this. This is something that psychologists did. It's important in this context to understand. What they did is, with these small kids, you can guess the age, maybe 5 or 6, this kid, they put a marshmallow in front of the kid, just one. Marshmallow, because it was done in the US, the marshmallow is a very sweet. But this psychology experiment has been replicated across cultures, and it always works. You put one single sweet in front of a child and tell the child, if you wait for 15 minutes without touching this sweet, you will get 2 instead of 1. But if you touch it before the 15-minute mark, you get only this 1 sweet. And you will find some people will pick up that sweet right away and go away. Some children will last 5 minutes or 10 minutes, and finally they'll get frustrated, they will cry, they'll pick up that sweet and run away. But there will be some children who will wait the entire 15 minutes, demand the second sweet, take both the sweets, and then run away. And there has been longitudinal studies, that is studies across time, that psychologists have done. And what they have found is that this is a great predictor of success in later life. The ability to hold on, the ability to delay gratification as a behavior in children is a great indicator of success as adults. They actually tracked the same people for many decades and they found this out. It was a costly but very useful experiment. Why am I talking about that here? Is to make the point that at any age, you are like the child with the marshmallow. If you want two marshmallows instead of one, you have to be intelligent about your time. You have to say no to taking the first marshmallow. So when you do that, of course, you will face challenges, and therefore I always say carry your own weather with you. People will say, no, it's very difficult. People are not being nice to me. They say I should do this, I should do that. And if you can counter that by saying, no, you say that I should do this, but I say that I want to do that. So you carry your own weather with you. I like this graphic where the weather outside may be terrible, but you carry your own weather. You choose your own sun, right? And now let me dial back my poetry. I get a bit poetic with this slide, but let me dial back my poetry and also mention a very specific thing, because at the end of such a discussion or a talk, sometimes people go away with the wrong impression that I'm asking them to be lone warriors. No, I'm not asking you to be lone warriors. To succeed, you need to succeed with people, through people, and along people. And therefore, you need a success network. You need elders who are advocates. You need younger people who are followers. If you don't have advocates, if you don't have followers, then you're not going to be successful. And therefore, if you want advocates and followers, you have to build that success network. And this is particularly for younger people. And also for those people, I used to be one of them who used to say, oh, I am an introvert. I don't know how to do networking. I cannot do networking. People go and show their business card directly. How can I do that? I cannot do that. Don't do that. That's not necessary. In fact, it doesn't work. But build a success network through these steps. Have respectful, reciprocal, trusting relationships with people. And we are seeing this in the voluntary arena. Here, for example, in the EC at BMA, all of us respect each other. We do work for each other and we trust each other. And that really is what creates a network. And we are collaborating in the meaningful way in a long term. So don't do this BHBC. BHBC is what it's an acronym for blow hot, blow cold. Some people will call you up once in 1.5 years, or they will suddenly send you a WhatsApp message and they'll be very cheerful saying, how are you, sir? I am always happy to meet you. Let us get together. By the way, I wanted this favor. And then after 1.5 years, after they get the favor, they disappear. And again, they come back saying, hello, how are you, sir? That doesn't work. That's not a success network.
Yes,
that is huge. So that doesn't work. It has to be time and effort invested, not manipulative. Otherwise, it doesn't work. You will not get advocates or followers that way. You will get some other people who will also be as mercenary as you. Having said that, I see the time. I have about 7 or 10 minutes because I would like to end at about 6 and then we can have interaction. Probably the last thing that I want to talk about is one of the big reasons why people don't think about the future. And I hear this all the time in coaching conversations. I am too busy to think about the future. You know what I actually hear that as? I will think of the future when it becomes the present. So you're still going to think about the future, but you'll think about today. You'll think about tomorrow. You're still going to spend the same amount of time thinking, but you'll not think about tomorrow today. So you're not doing yourself any favor. You just have an addiction to being busy. And I'm going to go on a limb and be a bit assertive, as they say, about my thoughts about what busyness means. And this is not business, okay? This is why, not I. So these are the symptoms of busyness, and I see them in my coaching work a lot. And I understand why they happen. I'm not critical of them, but let us recognize that we can change this. The symptoms are these. And the problem with the symptoms of being too busy to think about one's future, to create a vision and so on, is that none of these symptoms are recognized as symptoms of disease. We all have really good alternative terms for these. So we don't say, oh, I'm overloading self, so I'm busy. You know what we say? We say, I'm hardworking. And then we get pats for it. We don't say, I always encourage interruption. I'm never focused on thinking about the future. I say, I'm good at multitasking. I don't say I respond quickly to every stimulus. I'm not staying with the same future thinking work for 2 hours. What do I say? I say I sit in a cabin, but my cabin door is open always. People can come at any time. And even if somebody sends a WhatsApp message to me, maybe if I'm in sales, रात को 10 बजे भी WhatsApp message भेजा अमित भाई को, तो अमित भाई का reply आ जाता है, right? So what do we say? We are approachable. So we have these alternative explanations for our behaviors, and that makes us feel that they are not symptoms of being busy. We seek only the tangible. We are uncomfortable with thinking about the unknown future, but we say we stick to facts. We make small decisions here and there. People get frustrated with us. We don't make big calls, and this is important for those who run businesses. When I work with leaders as a leadership coach, I find leaders who are paralyzed into analysis, paralyzed into small decisions, incremental decisions, and sometimes the business really, really suffers. And sometimes the business dies because the right decisions, the bold decisions are not being taken. But you know why we are not aware that we are having a symptom of making incremental decisions? We call it careful. And last but not the least, people say, you said this yesterday in the meeting, today you are acting abruptly. Suddenly, sir, aapne ye kya decide kar liya? But we say, no, I'm not acting abruptly. I'm very quick. I'm a fast decision maker. So we have excuses. And because we have these excuses, we lose out on being non-busy. There's a very well-known, psychotherapist who has. So I did my counseling certification using that particular approach. And one of the topics that the person speaks about is, in English we have this idiom saying, "Don't just stand there, do something." And what this gentleman says is, sometimes don't just do something, stand there. Some of us know this, some of us do this, some of us don't. So whatever I have said so far, I'm sure that it is useful in parts to each of us. But the implications, if you are always busy, is that you'll always be reactive, you'll miss opportunities, you'll not dream of the future. And then who is the most affected party? The most affected party is not your boss, not your children, not your wife or husband, not your organization. The most affected party, when you do not write your personal mission and vision, is you. And therefore, no one else is going to request you to write a personal vision. You do it if you like to. That's the case I'm making through this 1 hour, that no one else is going to need this from you. It is not for someone else. It is for your own life. And because I spoke for an hour, and I'll close here and we'll open it up. I'll give it back to Dr. Laghate to decide. But just one last point from me. If all of this has been too much detail and too much to take in, then at least remember the Cheshire Cat. And everything else will come back to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Shripad, for that great session. And I will come back to the story about Alice in Wonderland. I remember the book Good to Great.
Yeah.
And it talks about you create a team, and even if you don't know the direction, forget it. First create the team, and then you will find the direction. Many a times we always play at the destiny, and we don't plan. Whatever choices we get in life, we try and grab the best possible, and we try, and many of us will vouch for that no, I had no plans of doing this, but it came and I thought that it's a great opportunity. So what will be your comments on this? And second thing is, when we are talking about, if you don't have your plan, you will work for someone else's.
Yeah.
I'm a follower. As I analyze myself, someone can say that I'm a follower. So what is wrong in that?
So I'll answer the second question first. And there is a lot of hard research for this. So this is not an opinion that I'm expressing. There is a lot of hard research in the medical community which shows that, so the research they have done is across cultures. And this is research about what is it that people regret on their deathbed. Nobody regrets anything of the nature of, I wish I had spent more time in office. Nobody says that, right? So on their deathbed, people regret some things that they did not do, such as certain connections, certain risks that they could have taken. So those are usually the regrets that people have, which means that most of us err on the side of caution and then we regret later. And therefore, with a follower versus leader mentality, what I would suggest is let's push ourselves a little bit to be leaders in some facet of our life. For example, we could be a follower at work, but a leader at home. Or we could be follower in terms of wealth. We are not Jeff Bezos, but we could be a leader in terms of health. And people ask us all the time, how do you do all these yogasanas at your age? Please tell us. We already have a yoga teacher, but you are so successful. You're not a yoga teacher, but you tell us. So lead in some aspect of your life. That wheel of life, you don't have to lead in all aspects, but lead somewhere. That is what the research says. I'm not on my deathbed, so I'm just quoting research. The research says that leads to fulfillment. Your earlier question, of course, was about teams. And can you repeat that, ma'am?
The Good to Great, this book,
Yeah.
I remember very strongly this term, because he is talking about which direction one wants to go. And to go to that, you need a team.
Yeah.
So you first create a team and then you decide the direction. So if the team is great, you can still go somewhere and find out the best destination that will be possible. And today we are talking about your Alice in Wonderland was asking for the direction, and the conversation between these two is bringing out that if you do not have the direction, any direction is a good direction. So is that having the same meaning that we are drawing from it?
No, not really. For every view that says that you assemble a team and then the team will take its own, get a life of its own. There is another view. Simon Sinek is probably the most popular of the motivational speakers at the moment who espouses the second view. He's written an entire book called Start With Why. And the idea there is that if you as a leader are able to explain why somebody should prioritize this over something else in their life, then the team will form. The people will come together because they will have an overarching sense of purpose. And we don't need to really, go into Western studies too much for this. If you look at just Mahatma Gandhi, what was the difference between Mahatma Gandhi? And this was something that came in my reading. I'm just passing it on. That was the difference between Mahatma Gandhi and all the other freedom leaders that we had, freedom fighters, is that he gave a sense of purpose. He answered the question, why? He did not say, what should we do for freedom? Or how should we do it? And when should it happen? He did all of that, of course. But why should we be free? And he focused his entire communication on why. And a really, really large team formed behind him. So I am a subscriber of that view. Start with the why, the team will form.
Yeah, I remember Ashish Basin in his Leader Speak series also had said the first principle. Why? Go back to the same question and keep on asking the same. Thank you, Shripad. I will request Kondap sir today to offer his comments, and then we will take some questions also.
Sir, it was an excellent presentation. I'm sorry to use the word even presentation, because probably something which we'll learn today. The most critical factor which I learned today was, when we talk of a strength, we talk of normal thing. But today you are given us the values, what strengths are in an individual. It's not my qualification, experience, or could be, but the way you talked about the strengths of an individual. And the last, maybe 2-3 slides before the closure, where you talked about the boss or any individual saying that my doors are always open. I think these are real life situations. Probably as you were talking to all of us, I was trying to correlate. And I was trying to correlate in such a way, I found that, well, what you have said is correct, what you're saying is valid, and what you have said is practical. And the last element I thought I should share it with you is, this has given a new dimension in terms of defining what vision and values we would like to as an individual. Finally, because we define our destiny. And when we define our destiny, our values play a major and critical role. Sir, it was an excellent, probably one of the best sessions I attended so far. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much. Excellent.
Thank you. Very kind of you. Thank you.
Hey,
Thank
Shripad,
you.
Hi. So,
Thank you, Kondap sir.
Thank
I'll request Bharat Bansal to unmute himself and ask his
Yes.
question.
Yeah. Yes, Bharat. Go ahead.
Shripad, thank you for the session. I had two questions actually. I joined a bit late, but so one is that when you spoke about assessments, right? And when we're speaking about strengths, so a lot of assessments today focus on gaps and not strengths. So are there a few assessments that you'd recommend, maybe like the Clifton Strength Finder or the likes of that? And the second part is that when we are actually making our own mission or vision statement for our lives, just like a company, there are a lot of stakeholders that the company keeps in mind while making it, right? So my father wanted me to do an MBA because he never could do it. My mom would want me to be a CEO at 50, but my son would want me to be at home at 4 every day. So how does that play into the entire scheme of things? Because it can't only be about self. There's an ecosystem we function in. So those are the two questions, Shripad.
Okay, so the first one regarding strengths-based psychometric assessments, you are right. Clifton is probably the best known, and you can go ahead with Clifton if you want to find out what your strengths are. There's also a subset of coaching which is called strengths-based coaching, which follows from strengths-based assessments. So yes, it's a good idea. But I'm going to take the liberty of adding an additional footnote to, because your question is about psychometrics. I'm personally not a great fan of psychometrics. While I mentioned that it is one of the sources, I'm personally not a great fan of psychometrics. They are a bit dangerous because if you are low on confidence, a psychometric test can sometimes pigeonhole you. For example, I took the MBTI, and the MBTI told me that I am I and not E. I'm an introvert and not an extrovert. Now, out of the 206 participants here, if I were to take a vote just now, I think most people will not call me an introvert, right? But I was told by that test that I'm an introvert. And when I got into a detail, I realized that if you're 49% extroverted and 51% introverted, you are given an I. And for the rest of your life, you say, oh, I'm an introvert. I don't like to talk to people. But you're just, perpetuating a story which somebody gave you. So therefore, psychometrics are dangerous. I'm using the word with full responsibility, a sense of responsibility. Psychometrics are dangerous if not used right. And your second question was regarding what about other people's agendas? Let them follow their agendas. We follow our agendas.
Okay, thank you. I know I did one test and the coach told me that I'm apparently very high on empathy and low on confrontation. So I'm like a doormat. So yes, I think I do buy into the fact that it's dangerous. So thank you for answering it.
Thank you.
So thank you, Shripad, for the answer. And
Kavitaji, but this remark Vansal made is a little objectionable. Just because you have empathy, you're not a doormat. I mean, who said that you're like a doormat?
So that's what. So that was the last coaching session I had.
I
with
think this is the danger.
And I just thought I resonated.
Satya Nadella bid Microsoft to $2 trillion enterprise valuation on the strength of his empathy. And how can you say that you have too much empathy? You're like a doormat. I think you got to kind of file a suit against that coach of yours and say that you're completely wrong. You must say that you're a full human being.
Indrapalji, let me interrupt you. Let me interrupt you. He said high on empathy and low on confrontation.
Okay. No, but he used the word doormat somewhere, didn't he?
Yeah. So, what he said was a psychometric test told me that I am high on empathy but very low on confrontation, and therefore I'm a doormat. So the very low on confrontation part is what I understand he's talking about, the doormat. So being very low on confrontation also doesn't make a doormat, but anyway. So.
But anyway, don't ever get that doormat word into your psyche at all.
Yeah. Thank you. And sorry for putting the cat among the pigeons to say, but yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Indrapalji, please give your comments on the session and any other feedback or any other.
No, I was just talking about this typical HR functions. You see, most of the time, most of the evaluations are done to fill up the gaps. any performance evaluation takes developmental evaluation. They said, okay, these are the gaps you need to fill in. Now, this sort of thinking comes completely in contradiction to what Buckingham and others have written, build on your strengths. And, I don't know that famous book of his, I forget the title, but Buckingham is the author. So I think we waste a lot of energy in trying to fill in the gaps. But instead, if we concentrated on building on strengths, not only people could benefit a lot, but organizations can also benefit a lot. And I think in India, given the critical and the nature and passing loose comments on people and stuff like that, most of the time our strengths are very much suppressed, or we are sort of told that you are egoistic if you talk about your strengths and things like that. So we become so unaware of our own strengths that we are never able to capitalize that. So I think it's focusing on strengths is a very crucial thing, not only for institutions, but individuals, and I would suppose everyone. I mean, I heard the doormat and I got upset. I said, how can whatever, I mean, I might have got it wrong or heard it partially, but to use such a word in context of any human being is very unfair. I mean, there's so many wonderful qualities a person may have. So I think building on strengths is a very crucial aspect of how we manage people, how we manage ourselves and so on. And asking that question again, that what are my strengths and how can I enhance them? It would be a good way to, I think, treat oneself. Any comments, Shripadji, on this?
Yeah, I do. I do actually have not a comment, but I just want to add to what you said, and that's for the benefit of all of us here. I'm going to get a bit technical, which is that, or not technical, but it may sound a bit theoretical, which is that I personally, from what I have learned, I understand that strengths are actually in an applied idea. What the fundamental idea is a trait. We have personality traits, and a given trait in a given situation becomes a strength. And therefore, to use Bharat's example, kind of without his permission, but Bharat, so if you are low on confrontation, that's a personality trait. It is not by itself either a strength or weakness. If you are the mediator and arbitrator of a extremely complex dispute, you being low on confrontation as a personality trait is going to be your biggest strength, right? So when you put a particular person with a particular trait into a particular situation, then that trait becomes a strength or a weakness. But if you go back and you're supposed to, it is contextual, and you take the same trait of low confrontation and you take it to, say, you are going and doing a street fight. Of course, then it's a weakness to be low on confrontation. So it depends on what you're using that personality trait for. That's just my comment, Indrapalji, on what you said.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'll request Fernandes sir to offer his comments.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I thought this distinction between leadership and managing oneself, largely in India, we have a lot of rules, regulations, systems. And I think leading is when you are able to break that rule in the interest of the organization and defend it later. To give you an example, I was reading the life of Mr. Pierre Tandon. One of the officers in State Trading Corporation died. Mr. Tandon went the next morning to the widow's house. He didn't offer great condolences because she was already weeping. He told her, please report for duty to State Trading Corporation. Your job is awaiting them. Now, at that time, State Trading Corporation were laying off people. But he had the leadership to tell the board, this is what I have done. In India, we have a lot of rules and regulations. We don't have enough leaders to break them when required.
True. And Mr. Fernandes, in fact, I would invite an additional comment from you with your kind of broad sweep of experience. One thing that I am seeing is that because of our culture, the Americans, for example, have a much more individualist culture where society does not frown upon the individual for thinking differently. We have a different culture. If I may do broad sweep, I can say Asian cultures. I know, do you think it is changing over the last few years? Are we becoming more individualist, and it's a good thing?
No, I don't think it's too good a thing to be individualist, because as Stephen Covey, whom you talked about, he said the Americans are too independent. If you notice in his book, what he says is we should go from dependence to interdependence.
Yeah.
In fact, he finds American society is too individualistic. Husband tells wife, you have your bank account, I'll have my bank account. Okay, they've lost the whole. They've lost the plot. We are all interdependent. But I mean, made several good points in the value system, and that is what I think is the heart of leadership. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think Shripadji, but by and large, aren't we reading too much of literature and material produced in the West rather than our own? I mean, as a percentage, if you take, even in the academic courses and elsewhere, I mean, amount of time you read American paper, Harvard Business Review, or Stephen Covey, or what have you. I think we read far too much of them than, maybe our Chanakya or maybe our author like Dr. Chakraborty of Calcutta IIM, etc., who have thought about Indian ethos and Indian culture. So it is, maybe it's a movement towards becoming an individual. Maybe it's a more comfortable position that why should I care about others and let me fend for myself and so on.
Maybe.
Yeah.
MBA
Thank you.
education actually makes us more individual. The management education, I think they teach us to fend for ourselves rather than, for the organization and so on, that what is in it for me, will it get me a promotion, will it get me something somewhere, etc.
I think these discussions will at least sensitize all of us towards thinking towards that. And that is what will be the success of such kind of discussions. Let me first thank Dr. Kiran Yadav for approaching Shripad today for this session. As we were not having Shri Shetty. So first, thank you, Dr. Yadav, and over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Lagate ma'am. Shripad, from the time I approached you in the afternoon till now, my confidence level is completely shattered. Okay, when I approached you in the afternoon, I had a whole lot of more confidence that I could, get you to come and share your thoughts and make us understand it. And you readily agreed. But now when I see the perspective with which you have made a presentation, when you talk, everything seems to be absolutely clear. It's crystal clear. I mean, you make it so easy and believable. But when I start to sit down and think and say, okay, how am I going to action this? And then I suddenly realize that I'm at a total loss. So, I'm rather more confused than clear about the entire proposition that you put in there. You're insisting that I must have first fixed my destination. And I owe it to myself.
Yeah.
Okay. And suddenly I'm realizing that, I was happy the way I was. Okay. And I seem to be doing fairly well and I have no complaints. But now that you've told me that I need to, set my vision and my, where I want to be after 10 years. And suddenly I say, okay, such a beautiful presentation and it's so compelling. And when I try to take a piece of paper and try to do a few things, I almost honestly, happily want to give it up. Okay. So how would you react to that?
So, not the first time I've heard this. Let me first say that. I think there are two aspects to it. See, one aspect is that if you use that wheel of life methodology, for example, there are eight things to think about. And I saw in the chat box, someone else also had a question. How do I know whether what is happening in my life is good enough, or do I need to earn for more? So that's the first point really, right? Do I need to be dissatisfied if I was satisfied till now? To that, my answer is obviously no, but it's worth checking. Because I personally, in all humility, would be very surprised if lots of people on this call are fully satisfied in all 8 aspects of their life. I will take it with a grain of salt if somebody says that to me. We may not want to publicly declare it, and there's no need to do that. But in all those, you may say all 7 of them are fine, but on my health, I wish my health could be better. Or you could say 7 of them are fine, but I wish that one particular relationship with one of my 3 brothers whom I'm estranged with for the last 20 years, maybe I should work on it. It can't be perfect. So that's one aspect that I think I find it difficult to believe when somebody says there are no problems to solve in my life. The second part is I'm saying that this is an exercise which is efficient. It doesn't take a lot of time. And the ROI that you get on that time is very high. Either in confirming that you don't want to do anything or in confirming that there are something small and big that you want to do. So those are my 2 pence. That I take it as a grain of salt if there's nothing to improve. One. Second is, I think this is a short exercise which gives a lot of bang for the buck, as it is called.
I mean, I agree with you that life cannot be devoid of problems. But does every problem need to be solved is what was my question was.
So I will mention a Sanskrit Subhashit. Asha nama manushya nam kashit ascharya shrinkhala. Yaya baddhaha pradhavanti muktastu tishtati panguvat. Asha is a miraculous chain that binds humans. Why is it miraculous? Because those who are bound by this chain called Asha are the ones who keep running forward. And those who don't have that chain, they stay at one place as if they have pangu. They are lame. So hope is what drives us. Hope is what gives us the spiritual, mental, and emotional energy to go on and on and on. And for hope, you have to have a future which is different from today. If you want to just maintain the current, life will be very boring. At least that's how I look at it.
Thank you. I will stay with ignorance is a bliss.
At least you learned a Subhashit today, no?
So could be 3, and so could be 3-4 large drinks also. They could be quite blissful. No,
Any other questions?
Shripadji, why don't you take this workshop, half-a-day workshop or something later on sometime? I mean, your point is so valid. I think those who want to can join and you can help us out. I mean, so what we are old, we should have vision for at least next 5 years, if nothing more.
Yeah. As I said, my father who's 88 keeps making plans, and I say, Baba, you're 88, and he says, so what if I'm 88? I'm not 92. I don't have an answer to that.
Good.
Yes, I think that is so true that at any age one can plan, and that gives a lot of energy when I look at my mother also, and all elderly people who still active intellectually. So that's great. I think we all should look forward to them and think that when we are at that age, we should be same active and with hope. Asha. I will request Tasneem Messiwala to ask, and then after that, Surbhi will ask the question. Surbhi Jechan.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. And hello, Mr. Shripad. Good evening to you. I was very fascinated with the entire beginning because Alice in Wonderland, Lewis Carroll, very close to my heart. We have forgotten Mad Hatter, we've forgotten other characters, but Cheshire Cat has always been very prominent in this particular story. However, Cheshire Cat was not a very amicable character. He was alien to the Wonderland and he was extremely indifferent. I would pose my question to you, sir, that in an organization, is it important in the high hierarchy to be like a Cheshire Cat many a times?
Well, For the benefit of everyone else, the way to understand Tasneem's question is to go and read the book. I cannot paraphrase or explain the question, but I can assure you, you will not be disappointed. It's one of the best books ever written. So I and Tasneem join in exhorting all of you to read the book if you haven't read it. So Tasneem, now that we have got that out of the way, I understand the metaphor you are using, but I think that the Cheshire Cat also represents a lack of warmth and a lack of empathy. And to that extent, if you want to use it as a motive, then it is an undesirable motive, and I wouldn't hold it up as something that I will use as a desirable set of behaviors in the organization. And as Indrapalji said at the start, empathy is probably the biggest. I mean, he didn't say exactly that, but I'm paraphrasing. Empathy is probably the biggest single skill gap that we need to improve on in the workplace today. And the Cheshire Cat does not represent high empathy. So I will pass on that one.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I will request Surabhi to unmute herself and ask the question.
Hello, sir. It was really great listening to you. I just wanted to ask you, you mentioned about the trait of an individual. So would you categorize pessimism and optimism as personality traits?
Not really. I mean, from whatever I have seen on the people who do this work on, and I'm not a psychologist, I must clarify that first of all. I'm not a trained psychologist. Coaches are not typically trained psychologists and should not represent themselves as one. And this is important to say, so I'm saying it. Optimism and pessimism are typically not taken as personality traits. Typically, they are, however, they have been researched, and there is enough evidence to suggest that each of us has a certain set point on optimism or happiness. And for example, there has been research which shows that if you find that a certain individual has a certain degree of happiness, and then they lose both their 2 out of 4 limbs, and of course they are very unhappy, and they are pessimistic about their the outlook of the rest of their life. You check back after 1 year, their level of happiness and optimism would have come back to where they are. Not very different. And if you also check with another individual with a certain level of optimism and happiness, and they get a lottery, of course they'll be very happy and they will be very optimistic about both themselves, and they will have optimistic views about the world in general as well, because they are on a high. Again, you check back after a year, they would have settled down to their previous set point. So there is a lot of research which shows this, and the entire book's written on this, that we have an inherent set point on happiness and optimism. And we can't do much to really change it. Our instinctual reaction to events in terms of how much is the glass full and empty doesn't change much throughout life. There seems to be some genetic component to that. What we can do, of course, is to deliberately second guess our instinctual reaction and choose a different reaction, which is entirely in the realm of personal development and hence coaching.
Yes.
Yeah.
So actually, with that question, I just wanted to say that, you also said that we should check ourselves, like introspect ourselves where we want to be by writing the mission and the vision at an individual level. So I just wanted to check with you if, pessimism or optimism plays a role with that too. Like today, if I'm at a pessimism level and I write my vision and mission, and I know that I'm not there yet, I mean, how is that going to help me?
Difficult question, but I may suggest don't think too much about the pessimism, optimism part of it. You are who you are. You dream your dreams. Somebody else shouldn't be coming and telling you your dreams are not optimistic enough. Then they are not your dreams.
Correct.
So I would, keep it simple and say, don't worry too much about pessimism and optimism. Just dream. Just think of what is it that you will regret not doing when you are older.
Right.
And find out how you can do it. Of course, so for example, people take examples such as when I'm older, I'll regret not bungee jumping when I was young, right? So it may sound like a bad decision to bungee jump because you can get killed, right? So one element of decision making is this, that you take risks, but then when you actually execute the risky option that you have taken, you can find out just before executing what you can now do to make that option better than. So if your original option was bungee jumping and the modified option was that you found out a particular company which has a particularly high reputation for safety when organizing bungee jumping. Just to give that example. So it's iterative. Don't get too much into optimism, pessimism. Go with what your dreams are, and only when translating them into reality you can be a bit careful. That's all.
Right. Thank you.
I will request Beena madam to unmute herself.
Sure.
Yeah. Hello. That was a wonderful session. Very stimulating, very engaging, and very thought-provoking. So when you said that what we require most is empathy at workplace. So I think in that case, we need more we see so many leadership coaches. So I think what we need is fellowship rather than leadership, because just everybody wants to be leader. So I think what we need is, rather than leading people, we need the fellowship, walking side by side, hand in hand. And if you go to see all the big leaders like Gandhiji, Mandela, they never try to lead. They always try to follow the purpose. They become leaders by following the purpose. So I think that is what we can create empathy by fellowship, and rather than leadership lessons.
I'll just comment a little bit. I agree with you, but I'll just comment a little bit on that. I don't want to throw the term leadership under the bus completely, because everybody in the team does not want the buck to stop with them. There are some people who are willing to take the extra responsibility and say the buck stops with me. And that's the leader. A leader is someone who has followers. A leader is someone who others say, when it gets really tough, I will go to this person. And that person will not shirk, and that person will get it done. So there is a case for retaining the idea of leadership. And it is also natural biologically for humans to do leadership and followership. It is unnatural for us as a species to have complete egalitarianism. It's not biologically natural. So let's not throw the entire idea of leadership under the bus. There is a natural order of things which is biological in nature, nothing value-based, which is that people have varying degrees of wanting to take ultimate responsibility, wanting to bring people together. Each of us has different traits which become strengths and challenges. So we need followers, we need leaders. Yes, the stigma of being a follower can be removed. The hubris of being a leader can be removed, but not the terms themselves.
Okay. Good to have your feedback. Thanks, Mr. Shripad. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
So thank you. We are already past 6:30, and Shripad, really thank you for taking your time out from your busy schedule on such a day where we were in a little bit problematic situation. I am really happy that we got very young and students who are also listening to you, and they will realize that every Wednesday and every Friday, in Wednesday Wisdom Webinar and Friday Fundamentals, we keep on inviting speakers who are going to give you thoughts which will lead you as a leader and also make you a follower, which is the perfect combination in many fields. Do watch our YouTube channel of BMA. We are having lot of past sessions that we had conducted. Subscribe it, like our videos, and also become members of Bombay Management Association, which is involved in developing the fraternity of management. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. And thanks, Shripad, once again for this session. Everyone is very excited with this session today. And I'm sure we can have, as Indrapalji had suggested, that we can have a wider time workshop for looking at the will that you had shown and how we can actually do it. So in workshop mode also, we would like to have you where we can join with our small groups and we can do that. So thank you very much. I will acknowledge the presence of Indrapalji and Fernandes sir, as always, very motivating and very guiding light and guiding star that we get them. Suresh sir, Suresh Matreji, Kondap sir today, Tendulkar sir as always, Professor RSS Mani, Kiran sir as he has organized, and he is also always there. And I will acknowledge presence of Dr. A.K. Sengupta and Professor B.V.R. Murthy, who were also there in this session. So thank you very much, and have a nice evening. Stay safe, stay home, and see you Wednesday, 14th of July 2021, where we will have DMA Masterclass and Professor Philip Kotler will be addressing that day. Don't miss it. Register on the link that is there on our website. Do join us for Philip Kotler's session on 14th of July. Till then, goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay.
Deepa, you were the opening act for Philip Kotler, so yeah. Thank you so much, ma'am. Deepa, thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Good show.
Oini, you may close the meeting.
Yes, ma'am.